CLA. Let's give him a round of applause.
Thank you very much. I get older with each introduction. Very nice to see you all here, and we're going to talk about auditing. We're going to get into some nuts and bolts, and Terry gave some wonderful background about how to prepare for agency inspections. We're going to talk about preparing further and diving into your compliance programs. And we're going to be somewhat focused today. And there are all sorts of audits, and we are going to talk specifically about environmental compliance audits. And we're going to focus on Southern California, and we're going to focus on air quality, water and waste matters, and hazardous waste. As I said, it's going to be very nuts and bolts. And I'd like it to be interactive because I'm sure everyone in this room has conducted an environmental audit. By show of hands, who in this room has conducted or been a part of an environmental audit? Okay, I'm hitting 80%. So I really look at this as a forum to compare notes, to compare logistics, to compare how you get things done. And then got a gentleman from Dakota Software here, Randy, who is who's an exceptional software developer. He's got a background in all sorts of technical software applications. So I thought we'd really dive into the weeds and get into detail. And so I invited Randy. And so that will be the third aspect of what we discussed. So I don't typically read off my slides, but I will read this one because I think it's important to define what kind of audits we're talking about. So just for kicks, the ALTA definition. A systematic method to examine the extent to which a facility is meeting its environmental regulatory requirements for all air, water, and waste media. Audits may be comprehensive or screening in nature. Media samples may or may not be taken. In all cases, recommended action items are to be addressed. And audits may be conducted by facility internal resources, corporate resources, consultants, or agencies. And the seriousness with which people put on audits really varies from facility to facility as well. I didn't want to put that on the slide, but I've got clients who are at the most heightened attention when corporate comes in and does an audit. And then I have others that when corporate comes in, oh, it's just corporate walking through our facility. And then I've got clients who really take inspections / audits conducted in conjunction with agency officials, and they consider them a different level of seriousness. Does anybody want to tweak this definition a bit? Does anybody think of a compliance audit as doing something different? I'm open. All right, that means I hit all bases. That's great. So let me just ask another question before I move to the next slide. Why do the folks in this audience audit? Why have you conducted audits in the past? Anybody want to throw out a reason? Yes, sir. What's your name?
To avoid a potential violation.
I am writing. I don't have a whiteboard. Avoid a violation. Anybody else? Okay.
What did she say?
And your name, please?
Teresa.
Hi, Teresa.
I'm not sure what she just said, but
she said confirm compliance.
Sure, and also kind of going along with that, checking that we're doing everything we think we're doing.
Okay.
Or say we're doing.
I like that. Doing what we said we do. Anybody else?
Establish a baseline.
Establish. I like that. And sir, I see the red jacket with. Are you from an agency?
No.
Okay.
Is this
For golf course.
After Terry said we should escort you like a 2-year-old. I'm sorry. So establish a baseline. Anybody else? All righty. Let's see how well my brainstorming correlated with yours, and I'm going to guess it's going to be very, very close. Now, compliance audits are part of an environmental management system, and so it's a small part of that. And one thing we didn't mention is many times compliance audits are done as part of a settlement agreement. And Terry will negotiate a great settlement. Instead of paying a fine, you say, I'm going to conduct a compliance audit. It's going to be under attorney-client privilege, and we'll show you, the agency, the final result, and we'll show you that we're putting in better systems, and we will no longer have these kinds of violations. And then other people said avoid violation, so that jives entirely with number 3 here. Confirm compliance was stated, and I think that jives pretty well with health insurance environmental compliance, almost verbatim. And then stating doing what we said we do, I think that correlates to inform management and line staff of facility environmental requirements. I would say so. And then here's another one which you didn't mention, but many times the audits are conducted in conjunction with mergers and acquisitions. We get a lot of calls that say we are going to buy a facility, buy a plant, or are you buying just the land, or are you buying the operations? And then so your scrutiny really in those instances are what can kill the deal. And by the way, Winefield, we're closing in 27 days. So fly out to Texas and Indiana and Washington, audit the facility, and tell me where my risks are at. So different approaches and different justifications for doing an audit. And did we miss anything? Are there any other reasons that you can think of you've conducted audits? Okay. Another list. I promise not to be too list crazy today, but audits tend to be very list and data oriented. So this is the environmental compliance audit step by step. And give it a brief look, and I'll just go over it. I always recommend you obtain attorney-client protection for audits that you do. They are discoverable unless they're going through an attorney, and who knows what you're going to find. My reasoning being is I've seen a lot of folks burned by having their files turned over to agency officials that showed audit results where the worst things happened, and that they said they were going to follow up on a recommended action item and they did not. So it puts a time on the violation, and that becomes very expensive. So we recommend having your audits protected outside or internal or general counsel. That being said, it can be as simple as, say if you're using a consultant as well, as routing the proposal through the attorney. And the attorney many times will just let the proposal, the consultant run with it. I'll check back with you in step number 7. Conducting regulatory applicability review for all media, and when I say media, again, I'm talking air, water, and waste. Generate your request for information. Now, all these steps can take a while, so I'm just going to breeze over it now. Compile your data, and it's very important to compile your data before your consultant or your internal team goes out in the field. You want to have everything ready. You want to be streamlined and out in the field. You just want to be able to walk through the facility quickly, grab the documents you need, and then take the docs back to the office to examine things. So we've done our site reconnaissance, and then I always recommend developing a draft report. There's always got to be a draft. And many times we've worked for attorneys and clients who never turn their audit into a final document. Anybody else in this room never turn their audits into final documents? I'm seeing one hand and I'm seeing 2 head nods. Terry, what are your thoughts on that?
I would not turn it into a final document.
There we go. So I hear that pretty regularly. I think anybody want to hazard a guess as to why audits never turn final? Anybody? Correct. And there's that, and there's also the fact that you can say, well, when it's in draft form, it's never really confirmed. So we never really had that violation in the first place, is one perspective. In step 7, I should say, I always like to correct things as soon as possible out in the field, and I've got a bunch of photos that we'll have going over that. I call it low-hanging fruit. I'm sure you guys use that expression as well. You can complete that audit report, but in your mind it's complete, but it still may be stamped draft. And then obviously you want to correct your recommended action items. So if you only walk away with one slide, this is really all you need to know, and we can all have some more coffee. But there's more details here. We do recommend that you do this on a periodic basis. I recommend annually. And then let's go into a little more detail in step 2. And I'm going to quote Rumsfeld. I'm not giving up my political persuasion, but we know Rumsfeld had some very interesting quotes. And the one that always stuck out in my mind, and I use in conversation a little too often, is sometimes you have unknown unknowns. Sometimes there are things we don't know, And I think that parallels in environmental engineers, environmental compliance managers, day-to-day activities. Can you really know everything from a compliance standpoint at your facility? I see half the audience shaking their head. But there are all sorts of resources to fill in those gaps. And so, generator knowledge, many people at your facility have a very good idea of what you do operationally and about the regulations at your plant. Just compile data from those in your facility. I remember, and I always make allusion to my past refining and other petroleum days, but I always, when I had someone come work for me, I always said, I'd like you to ride the vacuum truck for 2 days. For those of you who are not familiar with refineries, they have all sorts of water conveyances, both processed sour, meaning that has sulfur waste, and storm. And an environmental engineer would come from such and such grade school, and he'd want to cite the regulations and talk about the processes. I said, that's all very interesting, but you are going to ride with Vance, the vac truck operator, for at least a day. And so they would see how all of our operations flowed into their final resting place, so to speak. They would see how operators were dumping things both legally and illegally. We actually had some toxic pits we had to get rid of. So when I say generator knowledge, it's not always the most obvious sources. Really dive into the operations of your facility, and from there it'll spill over into regulatory knowledge. Obviously, many folks are not doing an audit for the first time, so just recap the compliance audits you've done from past years. If you know of a consultant that you think you can work well with, that knows your industry well, it's sometimes nice to get a third opinion. And we've got clients we've been working with for 10 years, and I said, you know, why don't we bring in another teaming partner here, another consultant, just so you can get a different perspective. We do that all the time. And then thirdly, fourthly, I should say, there's online software tools, and we're going to talk about Dakota in a moment. Usually I just breeze over these things, but since this is a much more sophisticated crowd than we typically talk with, we're going to dive into software. But what the online and software tools do is provide you drop-down screens, and they'll provide a regulation. It'll ask you questions, and applicability will be determined. That's in 15 seconds what Dakota has taken years and years to establish. So once you have found out the regulations that apply to you, someone has to